Hey guys, what's up? It's Grim, and in today's video I'll be talking us through a playthrough of the King's Rest dungeon from a rogue's perspective. I've taken some footage from my stream for this, and in this video I'll be talking us through the trash pulls, some boss tactics and other general rogue tips and tricks that you can use to complete this dungeon. One hot rogue tip that I can give you straight away is try and play the elusiveness talent instead of cheat death. There's a lot of predictable single target damage that you can greatly reduce by playing this. The first trash pool we go into here is the Minion of Zul pool. Those are the small ghosty looking things. They will fixate on a random player when pulled, and if they reach that player, they will fear them. They have a magic buff on them that gives them a shield and makes them unkillable until the shield is either broken by damage or dispelled. So any offensive sort of purge or priest master spell can be really useful. Cloak will also negate this effect. So if you play Blood Elf, it is really useful to run in with Cloak and use your Blood Elf racial to dispel all of those magic buffs on the mobs and kill them instantly. The next pull you can do here is either 3 or 4 of these animated guardians, depending on the route you're taking or how spicy you're feeling. Now these are relatively harmless except for their suppression slam that you see them do right there. You can see the animation on the floor. It is a frontal cone. If you stand in that and get hit by it, you will die. However, one thing to note is that once they have slammed down and the crackling lightning on the floor is there, you can run through it safely and it won't harm you. Now, King's Rest is mostly a single target dungeon, so try to play a more single target oriented build if you can, playing something like Blood of the Enemy Major or even Vision of Perfection if you have Hasted Corruptions and some Brigand's Blitz traits, or Breath of the Dying Major, which is a super strong major in its own regard. Most teams will kite the first obelisk boss into the first boss room. And in this first boss room there is no trash packs until you hit the gong, which will start a short timer which will then spawn the trash packs. Now one of the trash packs in this room is another Minions of Zul pack. They have a set spawn point and there's a neat little rogue trick you can use to make sure no one has to deal with this. If you catch them on the spawn point with your cloak active, the mobs will all fixate on you, die instantly, and you won't get feared because you have your cloak. You can then vanish, drop combat, and save your team a whole lot of hassle. Now you have to make sure that your team is far enough away when you do this so they don't get fixated. And you have to make sure your tank has not pulled anything because that will put people in combat, which will pull the entire room, which will cause a wipe. Now, as you maybe noticed, I have a weak arrow that shows me the countdown timer for when to use Cloak. It's super useful and I make sure to leave a link to it in the description below. Now this first trash pool here consists of 3 different mobs: the Shadowborn Witch Doctor, the Shadowborn Warriors and the Shadowborn Champion. The Witch Doctor is by far the most dangerous mob in this pool, and you want to make sure you have a kick rotation set up to interrupt as many of its casts as possible. The most important cast is the Shadowbolt Volley if you have to choose, and after that you want to make sure you interrupt as many of the Deadly Chill casts as possible. The other mob, the Shadowborn Warrior, does a Gust Slash, which leaves a tornado that sort of swirls around the room that you want to try and dodge. If you do get hit by it, it will leave a nasty dot on you that can be especially dangerous on fortified weeks. However, if you are playing Elusiveness, as I suggested earlier in this video, you can reduce a lot of its damage. The last mob is the Shadowborn Champion, which stacks an Enrage buff on itself, which can be soothed by druids or hunters, and also does a shield in front of itself, and you want to make sure you are behind that, otherwise you won't be able to hit it. Once you kill the last trash mob, a short timer will start and you will spawn the boss. The boss will come out of the pool in the middle there, fly halfway across the room and then become attackable. Now this boss is fairly straightforward but has some abilities that you really want to look out for, and also a couple of neat little tricks for rogues. The first ability that's key to this fight is the Spit Gold ability. The boss will target a random player with the Spit Gold ability, as you can see right here. It will leave a nasty dot on the player, especially on Tyrannical weeks, and when the buff expires, the player will drop a pool of gold, which will eventually spawn an ad when the boss casts its Lucrous Call. Now the Spit Gold is targeted, as I said, and you are able to vanish this. However, it will recast on someone else. So try to be a bit mindful about this. Can you take this cast? And if you can, maybe just let it go through on you. Alternatively, if you have your cloak up, you can just cloak it and nothing will happen. If you do get the Spit Gold debuff on you, make sure to pop your feint if you are talented into Elusiveness, because it will greatly reduce the damage this buff will do. The other thing you want to look out for is the Serpentine Gust, which is a big AoE circle, as you can see the boss do right here. Make sure you're out of that because it hurts a lot. Now when the boss casts its Lucre's Call, it will spawn adds from all of the pools around the room. These adds do not have a lot of health, but when they die they will just drop a new pool, so it is a sort of a soft enrage timer. If the adds do reach the boss, it will give the boss a large shield. So if for some reason you need to run out, say with spit gold or anything, or the adds are getting too close, just pop your blade flurry, make sure you run into them, kill a couple, but be careful that you don't get hit by the pools of gold that the adds leave behind. These adds are CCable, so if you can throw out a gouge, a blind, or a stun, or anything like that, it can really help your group. After you kill the first boss, you will make your way into the next room, which has a sort of Gauntlet style encounter going on. There's 4 packs of mobs in this room, and they will spawn one after the other, but they won't spawn until you kill one pack, which will then trigger the next pack, and so on. Now there's 4 different packs in this room, and the rotation changes based on the week. The first pack we get in this room is the King and Queen pack. Now the Queen does a Shadow Bolt cast, which you want to try and have an interrupt rotation for because it can do a lot of damage, especially on fortified weeks. The other thing she does is a Seduction cast, which will mind control a friendly player, but it can be offensively dispelled by any sort of offensive purge. The other thing the bosses do is the Bladestorm cast by the King. This will target a random player and follow them with a Bladestorm style ability. If you are playing Outlaw though, you can outrange this and still hit him while he is doing the Bladestorm. The next pack we deal with is another Queen and her pet skeletal raptor. Now she does a shoot ability, and especially the first shot is very important to not be the one that she is targeting because it does a lot of damage and it killed her demon hunter there. Just leave the tank to that for a little bit, make sure he has the aggro, and then start attacking. The other ability she does is a pool in the ground that you can see right there. It does a lot of damage, don't stand in it. Classic World of Warcraft stuff. Now her pet raptor does a hunting leap, which means it will jump to a random player and do a short range frontal cone attack that does an enormous amount of damage. Try to get out of that as soon as you can. The next pack we deal with is this small 3-pack of mobs here. Now all 3 of these mobs have got an ability that you want to look out for. Guard Captain at 2 does an Axe Barrage cast which targets every single member of the party and leaves a nasty dot on you, but can be line of sighted. If you do get hit by it, you can use your Elusiveness Empowered Feint ability to make sure you reduce the damage you take from the dot. The other thing you want to look out for is the Channel Lightning cast that the King does. You'll channel up for about a second and after that start channeling down in a big circle around him. However, he can be knocked and disrupted that way after he starts to channel down. If you do it before that, it won't interrupt him. The other mob does a regeneration type cast that you can interrupt, and other than that doesn't do a whole lot. The fourth and last pack that we had to deal with, but like I said, this may be different order for you, is the big AoE pack, which has the King and a lot of smaller mobs. Now the smaller mobs do a little swirly on the ground that you will see them do. If that goes off, it will do a lot of damage to whoever's in that general area, so make sure if you see the swirly on the ground to move away from it. The King does the Hidden Blade cast that you saw him do right there, which leaves a nasty poison dot on whoever he targets, which can either be dispelled, or if you have no one that can actually dispel poisons, you can cloak it if it is on you. After you kill this last mob pack, most teams will opt to play the obelisk and kite it into the next boss room. By doing so, you skip a purification construct, which is a high health and not very efficient mob to kill. However, some weeks may require you to play it to make up count or be able to skip stuff elsewhere. If you do, you want to be aware of its abilities, and there's 2 you want to look out for. The first being the Purification Strike, which will target the tank and leave a big fiery pool on the floor. Make sure you don't stand in it. The other thing is a Purification Beam, which will also target the tank and then go either clockwise or counterclockwise around the mob. Try and avoid this because it leaves another nasty dot on you. The second boss room is relatively straightforward. On teaming weeks there will be an additional purification construct in this room, so be very careful of this. However, on non-teaming weeks there's only 2 types of mobs you have to deal with. The first of those is the Embalming Fluid, which are the little green slimes that you can see. They are not very dangerous, so most teams will opt to play all of them at the same time and just AoE them down, unless it's something like a bolstering week. These little green blobs will target ranged players, generally speaking, and leave a little swirly under them. Don't get hit by that, or you will get a dot, which does a lot of damage. Now when these embalming fluids die, they will also leave a pool of green goo on the ground, which will leave a dot on you and also slow you. So if a lot of them die at the same spot, you will just get rooted and die. Make sure you're not anywhere near them when they start dying. These pools will slowly expand outwards, so you have got some time to dodge them. If you do find yourself trapped in the middle of it, you can cloak it or grapple out of it. The next mob in this room is the Interment Construct, and most people will just play both of those at the same time. These mobs will cast an entomb on a random player, which will put the player in the closest coffin to where they are at the time of the entomb hitting. If people don't free this player by right-clicking the coffin, these mobs will cast Wheel of Mourning, which is an AoE pulse that does a lot of damage if it goes on too long. But thankfully, freeing people from the coffin is not very difficult. However, one thing you want to be careful of is if you are playing two of those, that the entombs sync up. If two people get put into the same coffin, it can bug out these mobs, and even though all players are free, it will still cast its Wheel of Mourning. If for some reason you do get a double entomb and you're unsure whether you're going to be put into the same coffin, try and run back a little bit to the other closest coffin to try and avoid causing this bug. The second boss of this dungeon is Machimba the Embalmer, who has a couple of abilities that have interesting interactions. Now the first of those abilities that he does is the Burn Corruption. It targets a random player, as you can see right there, with a big fiery swirly and leaves an AoE pool of fire on the ground that you don't want to be in ever. The next cast is the Drain Fluids, which will also target a random player and do a large amount of single target damage to them. If you get targeted by this, you can either vanish this or cloak this to completely negate all of the damage. However, if you don't have either of those things, you can use your Elusiveness Empowered Feint. Now the other ability the boss does is one we've already seen in the Interment Constructs in the form of the Entomb. Now this will still target a random player, but it will this time also put them in a random coffin around the room. If you are in a coffin, you get a new action bar. If you press 1 a couple of times, the coffin that you are in will shake, so people will know which coffin to click. If you click the wrong coffin, it will spawn a mummy that does a Wretched Discharge cast that does a lot of damage to the whole of your party and almost always guarantees a wipe unless it is CC'd, which it can be. One thing you may have seen in the MDI, for example, is a little trick with the Entomb. Now, if someone gets entombed and all 4 players that aren't entombed click a coffin at the same time, it may bug out the boss and freeing the player that was in the coffin, but will also for some reason stop the boss from casting any other abilities for the rest of the fight. This requires a lot of good coordination and is hard to pull off, and as I mentioned before with the mummy that spawns if you screw this up, it is also very high risk. If you are comfortable with this though, or you have really good coordination, it is something that is high risk but also very high reward because it trivializes the rest of the boss fight. After you kill the second boss, you move into this next sort of long corridor style area, which has a lot of dangerous trash packs in it. The first trash pack you'll encounter is 2 Hex Priests and a Spectral Berserker. Now these Hex Priests have 2 different casts that you want to try and interrupt, and the first of those is the Spectral Bolt that you'll probably see them casting soon-ish here. These do a lot of single target magic damage. You want to make sure that these don't target you because they will kill you. The other thing they do is a Hex cast. Now you can CC these Hex Priests, but if you CC them during a Hex cast, they will recast until they are able to either finish the cast or someone kicks this Hex. So you want to try and make sure you save your kicks for the Hex where possible and CC them on the Spectral Bolts. Now, as you can see here, the tank dies, loses aggro, and the Spectral Bolts start flying around and killing people off. The other mob in this pack is the Spectral Berserker. Now, they will occasionally jump to a random location and leave a swirly, and they also do a Severing Blade cast. This will target the closest player or pet, so this can also go on pets, and leave a big bleed on whoever gets targeted by this. If for some reason this Severing Blade bleed ends up on you, again, you can use your Elusiveness Empowered Feint to try and reduce the damage. Now, after we recover and we res everyone, we move into the next trash pack, which consists of the Berserker that I've just talked about, and this time also a Witch Doctor. Now this Witch Doctor will target a random player and put a Frost Shock on them, which is a magic debuff that slows them and also does a bunch of damage. It's just something that you're kind of gonna have to deal with. But the other thing that the Witch Doctor does is drop a Healing Tide totem. You want to try and swap to this and kill it as soon as possible. It can't be hit by AoE abilities, but thankfully we don't have many of those. But something like a Demon Hunter's Blade Dance, for example, will not hit it. So it is a lot of the time very important that you as a rogue switch to this because of all our single target abilities. Now this next pool consists of 2 Raptors and a Beastmaster. The Raptor mechanic we've already seen before in the Gauntlet style room. They will jump to a random player, do the short range frontal that does a lot of damage. However, these Raptors can be CC'd. You can gouge them, stun them, blind them, do whatever you want. The other mob in this trash pack is the Beastmaster, who has 2 abilities you want to look out for. The first of those is the Poison Barrage, which targets a random player and shoots out a frontal cone of poisonous arrows. This can be stopped by CCing them, but it will usually recast. The other ability it does is a Deadeye Shot, which also targets a random player, does a large amount of single target damage and also knocks you back. Now the other thing you saw me do before is distract this patrolling brute. I wanted to try and keep him in place because we were hoping to pull this brute with this other trash pack that you can see us do right here. Now this brute patrols up and down the corridor but can be distracted, as I said before, to try and keep him in place if he is in a position where you don't really want him. The brute itself is not very dangerous but is really inefficient to kill, especially with a lot of melee, because he does this big ground crush ability that you have to run out of. This can be disrupted by using any sort of knockback like a Ring of Peace or an engineering belt, but he will recast it when he lands. The other mobs in this trash pack that we pulled the brute with are just the same Berserker, Witch Doctor and Spectral Hex Priest that I've already talked about briefly before. After you kill this pack, what most people will then do is either play the next pack on the bridge or play an obelisk and kite it into the 3rd boss room. This may depend on your route or bloodlust timers or what have you, so make sure you know beforehand what's happening and when. Now this 3rd encounter is a council style boss encounter, in the sense that there are 3 different bosses and the next one won't spawn until you kill the one before it. Now this rotation will also vary week by week. This first boss we encounter here is relatively straightforward. This is a caster boss who has 2 different casts, a lightning bolt and a poison nova. Interrupt the lightning bolt if you have spare kicks, interrupt the poison nova always because it will wipe your group. The other thing this boss does is spawn 4 totems around the room occasionally. Now these totems have varying degrees of dangerousness, and the first one you want to kill is the explosive totem. If the explosive totem goes off, it is usually speaking a wipe. The other totems this boss spawns are a Torrent Totem, a Thundering Totem and an Earthwall Totem. However, none of these are as dangerous as the Explosive Totem. The Thundering Totem does a slow cast. When it goes off, it will interrupt any casts that are going on at the time. The Torrent Totem will leave random pools across the whole of the arena, as you can see, which hit quite hard if you do get hit by them. The Earthwall Totem leaves a little shield on the boss. Now, if this boss is not the last in the rotation, he will periodically spawn throughout the rest of the encounter and cast his Poison Nova. You want to try and make sure you have a ranged kick, or at least have someone assigned to kicking this cast, because if it goes off throughout the rest of the encounter, it will still be very lethal. The second boss we face is Kula the Butcher, which is by far the most dangerous boss in this whole dungeon. A lot of teams will save Bloodlust and other cooldowns specifically for this boss. She has 2 abilities that you want to look out for, first of those being the whirling axes that you can see right here. She will spawn those swirly axes that will rotate outward from her in a circle style pattern. If you get hit by them, they leave a really nasty bleed, so make sure you avoid those. If you do get hit by one, you can use your elusiveness empowered feint to reduce the damage you take from the bleed. Most teams will tank her in the middle of the room because it makes it easier to avoid the axes. However, some teams will tank her where she spawns, because the spinning axes will despawn before they reach the far end of the room, which means your ranged can stand there and not have to worry about the axes. The other ability the boss does is the Severing Axe ability, which is the most dangerous ability that you want to look out for. This leaves an enormously large bleed on you and will almost always be lethal unless you have some sort of cooldown. If you have a paladin, they can bop you to completely remove the bleed. However, there's also different ways of dealing with this. Now, as a rogue, you can either parry this bleed or vanish it if you're quick enough. However, the boss does not actually target a player, so it's really hard to see who is going to get it. The best way of doing this is knowing that the boss will face the player that she will be targeting with the bleed. So you want to make sure you run away from her to a place where there's no other teammates, and if she does face you, make sure you riposte, evasion, or vanish this. If for some reason you do get hit by it, ask for a cooldown or use your elusiveness empowered feint again, use a crimson vial and probably also even a health pot and a health stone to try and survive this. If Kula is not the last boss you kill, she will occasionally spawn throughout the rest of the encounter in the middle of the room and spawn her swirling axes again. Now this last boss for us was Akali the Conqueror, who's not very dangerous but does have a barrel through ability that you want to look out for. This will target a random player and after a short delay charge to the point where they are. This will deal a lot of damage, but it can be shared based on how many people got hit along the way. It's also dodgeable and vanishable, etc. So if it goes on, say, a demon hunter, they can solo it with, for example, a blade dance. If Akali is not the last boss that you kill, he will spawn throughout the rest of the encounter and target a random player with this barrel through again. Now, as I said before, you can vanish this if this targets you, and you want to try and do this towards the end of the cast because it means the boss is not doing anything for all of this time while it is charging up. However, if Akali is not the last boss you fight and he will be spawning throughout the rest of the encounter, you want to try and not vanish this because sometimes it will screw up the way he interacts for the rest of the encounter. If he does appear throughout the rest of the encounter, if he was not the last boss that you killed, you can just vanish his charge. After we kill the third boss, we take the awakened portal back across the bridge and go out at the other end again, so we can kill the last pack that's between us and the last boss. Now this pack is relatively straightforward, it's mobs that we've already talked about. However, one thing you want to be careful of is the Beastmaster's Deadeye shot. As I mentioned before, this will knock you back, so if you have your back facing the edge of the bridge, it can just knock you off the bridge if you're not careful. The last little boss mob that we do here is the Shadow of Zul. Now this is a very dangerous mob and absolutely trucks the tank with its Shadow Barrage ability. On fortified weeks, most teams will save cooldowns and even Bloodlust just for this one mob. Even as non-tank players, there's a couple of abilities we want to look out for. First of those being the Pool of Darkness that you can see him spawn right there. If no one is inside this pool to soak it, it will pulse AoE shadow damage. However, the range on this pool is fairly short, so if the tank kites away the Shadow of Zul, it is easy to outrange it. The other ability is Dark Revelation, which you can see on our mage right now. After a short while, this will explode and spawn an ad on the position of our mage in this case. However, if you get targeted by this as a rogue, you can just vanish it, which will instantly spawn the ad but deal no damage at all. Now the ad is a minion of Zul that we've already encountered a couple of times in the dungeon and can just be dispelled so it doesn't fear anyone. The last boss in this dungeon is King Dazar himself, which is a very long fight, especially on Tyrannical, and a lot of abilities that you want to look out for. Because you have so much room to work with, it's like an enormous room where you can walk around a lot of teams will opt to play at least one obelisk with this boss. There's a couple of abilities that King Dazar does that you want to look out for, and the first of those is the Quaking Leap that you saw him do just there. This will target a random player, then jump to them after a couple of seconds and deal a lot of damage based on how far away from the point of impact people are. One thing you can do as a rogue, and you can see me fail it miserably right here, is grapple away before he actually hits you. However, because I was targeting the Blood of the Corruptor, I wasn't sure of the time and sort of guessed and died miserably. The other thing the boss does is a Gill Slash that you can see him do right now. This will also target a random player, spawn a slow moving tornado that will move to the spot where the player was, and then once it hits that spot, it will start flying around the room. If you get hit by these tornadoes, they will work in a similar fashion to the Shadowborn Warrior tornadoes, in the sense that they leave a large bleed on you for a little while, which you can once again reduce by your elusiveness empowered feint. Once the boss hits 70% HP, his first raptor ad will spawn, which is Reban. Now this raptor has the similar mechanics to the other raptors we've seen in this dungeon. They will jump to a random player and do their hunting leap. This raptor can not be CC'd, so you want to make sure you just get out the way. Now here you see me successfully pull off the Quaking Leap combo and actually finally not die this time. Once King Dazar hits 60% health, he spawns his second raptor pet, Tazala. He will jump onto this raptor and get a massive shield, which means you won't be able to damage him anymore until you kill this raptor. One thing to note though is that you can still Blade Flurry onto the boss, and even though he absorbs all of the damage, you can still build your wit stacks to help you kill Tazala quicker. Now Tazala also does a short fear that you can either tremor or just soak, which is what most groups just do. After you have killed Tazala and you've managed to get the boss down to around 40% health, the boss adds a new mechanic in the form of impaling spears, which can spawn in a couple of patterns. Now the first pattern is one that you will see right now, which starts at one side of the room and will slowly rotate the whole way around. If you get hit by those spears, they deal a lot of damage and you get stunned for a while. However, you are able to run through them if you time it correctly. The other pattern is a sort of star type pattern with some safe zones and some unsafe zones, so it's much easier to dodge those spears. One thing to note is that in the rotating spear pattern, the spears will stop when they get to the point where we were tanking the boss for a little bit, and then the pattern starts again. So you have some time to let the spears despawn, and then before they respawn, make your way over to the other side. You can also vanish the Quaking Leap if you want, but be very careful with this because it will retarget a different player and they often won't get a DBM style notification from this. So be really careful about when or even if you should do this. One thing to also be aware of is that Quaking Leap damage is AoE damage. So with a regular feint you can reduce a lot of the damage that you would maybe originally take from it and save your healer some headaches. And with that, I think I've been over all of the trash pools, tactics and rogue tips in this King's Rest dungeon. I hope it was informative. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment if you think I've missed anything, and hit subscribe if you want to see more. You can also catch my stream and come chat to me on twitch.tv/crimwow. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video.